Increasingly, we're talking more about, we're having to label agroecology and to say this transformative agroecology, this is what it means. And the reason why is because agroecology, just as a set of techniques, yeah, it's apolitical, right? It's just, yeah, integrated pest management, great, agroecology, but it doesn't really address any of the underpinning issues and structural issues of powers and asymmetries. But if looked at from a political economy ecology lens, I mean, we know that it's not incidental or accidental. There's actual structural violence and inequalities that are in place that make people vulnerable to shocks, to stresses, to crises, and just to poverty and injustice, right? We know that. So that's what agroecology in its transformative dimension aims to do. It really recognizes plurality and diversity of knowledge and different ways of knowing and doing. There's a very important element of the cosmologies that underpin that social, ecological, and spiritual relationships, collective agency and adaptive capacity. So like this idea, very strong food sovereignty and agroecology are very much about autonomy and people's autonomy versus like a top-down technocratic delivery system, which is often tied to transnational systems of capital, right? Like for instance, contract farming arrangements, like let's support contract farming arrangements where smallholders just become field hands for the corporate system to sell green beans in the UK, and you have this export-led type of dynamic, right? So I would say agroecology and its sister discipline, food sovereignty, very much put the focus on that autonomy and on the process of intentional change that aims to disrupt and challenge some of these underpinning structural issues that are, you know, keeping people in the passive position that they are in and vulnerable. A very strong element of transformative agroecology also is not something that is done to people, like experts come in and teach farmers how to farm. I mean, come on. You know, it's like people have been farming for, you know, generations, and in some cases since time immemorial. And so the idea of creating more of these facilitating processes where people's knowledge and people's critical capacities are strengthened rather than they become passive, you know, recipients of expert advice. So in that sense, it builds, you know, social capital, for lack of a better word. The other thing we really wanted to bring into this conversation is the importance of social movements and how social movements define agroecology. So we all know, well, I hope we all know about the Nyeleni Declaration. So in 2015 in Mali, La Via Campesina and allies got together and came out with Nyeleni Declaration. And this is how they define agroecology. You know, agroecology is a way of life and the language of nature. It is indeed a set of practices such as, you know, local varieties and local integrating crops and things of that nature. And these practices are based on ecological principles. But you can see that the practice element is one element of a variety of other more people-centered elements. So the importance of territories as a fundamental pillar of agroecology, you know, not just like the delineation of the colonial nation state, but rather like how people feel in their territories and their associations with territory. Which is, you know, is beyond boundaries. Collective rights and access to the commons as a fundamental pillar, the different knowledge systems and diverse knowledges of people, also a fundamental factor. The cosmovision element, so like this necessary equilibrium between nature, the cosmos, and human beings, and really just the spiritual dimension of connection to Earth. And systems of production, families, communities, collectives, and organizations. So movements are the fertile soil on which agroecology flourishes. So this is a little bit of a different debate than talking about nematodes and you know, yeah, just soil as something, right, other than being integrated as part of the human systems and the movements that are behind it. The autonomy principle we already talked about as being really central and as challenging the control of global markets. And there's an element of self-governance that comes with that autonomy, which is really critical. And agroecology is political, and ultimately this is why people tend to want to reduce it to a set of practices, because in its grandeur and in its transformative potential, it's uncomfortable, right? It challenges and it transforms structures of power in society. And both women and youth are critical to the agroecological movements, because they are the base of the social basis, and the evolution of agroecology will really, really depend on them. So this is kind of what the social movements are talking about it, and broadening the agroecology out to more transformative and emancipatory approach.